Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MacMurray College Social Work podcast. My name is Jordan Gill, and I am a junior in the social work program. So, Dr. Joe Scalacci came across an article on the Inside Higher Ed website that kind of discusses how important a professor's role is in the student's success when it comes to college courses. And that really got us thinking maybe what students at MacMurray think make a good professor and how the professors can improve the student's education. According to the Inside Higher Ed article, which was published on January 25th of 2017, they discuss some key traits that maybe really help students be successful in college courses. These include self-regulation, active participation in classes, transparency, knowing exactly what the professor expects from you and what you're expected to give to the class, and assessment, which we all know is super important in social work anyway. We are constantly assessing ourselves and assessing our clients, assessing each other. Students should be able to check their own progress, regulate themselves, things like that. This article also states that the more actively participating in their education a student is and more involved, the more likely they are to get real value out of it and really take the professor's points from the lectures and the assignments. The more that they can see the work and the experience of the class align with their goals, the more likely they are to take it seriously and really search for the value in it. So after reading this article, I decided to ask some students at MacMurray what they think makes a good professor. Okay, I'm here talking with Brittany Chambers, who is a student at Mac. She studies psychology. What year are you in school, Brittany?
I'm a senior.
So you're going to graduate this May?
Yes.
Okay, I just have some questions on what you think makes a good professor.
Mm-hmm.
First one is, to what degree do you think the professor plays a role in your success as a student?
I think it's a really big degree because, if they don't care, then the student's not going to care. If the professor is rude, then
rubs the students the wrong way.
Yeah, and the student's not going to want to listen. They're going to obviously think negatively towards the professor.
Not going to want to go to class and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, Brittany, in your opinion, what is the most standout quality of a good professor?
That they respect the student. They make the student feel safe where they're at. They have good feelings of learning, listening to the student, just have a welcoming atmosphere.
What structure of class do you prefer? Do you prefer like a lecture where the professor's up talking in front of people, just kind of presenting the material, or like a lab situation that's more hands-on, that you can kind of experience it, or maybe group projects or everybody's kind of working together?
I definitely learn best in a hands-on type of classroom. That way I'm actually doing it for myself. So I just think it is in my brain a lot in a different kind of way than in a lecture, because I was actually doing it for myself instead of listening to someone try to tell me how it went.
So less in theory, more actually taking part in it.
Yes.
Gotcha. Do you think that your success in a class has more to do with the way they're presenting the material, like the learning style, the structure of the class, or with the professor itself and how they're presenting it, like how they're teaching it?
I think it's both. I think it's a part of if I'm actually going to study, and if I want the grade that I want, then I have to actually do the work to get there. But I also think it's a part of the professor too, because honestly, if the professor acts like they don't want to be there, they don't care about the students, it's a very negative atmosphere, I'm not going to want to go. And if I don't want to go, then I'm not going to show up, and I'm not going to know what homework I have, and it's all around, it's just going to be negative.
So you feel like if the professor's not giving the effort, the students aren't going to give the effort either?
Absolutely 100% agree.
Gotcha. Do you feel comfortable when a professor asks you to actively participate in the class, maybe get up and talk or answer questions?
I'm fine with answering questions, but when I have to get up in front of someone and in front of the entire class and speak or read a paper or something like that, I am kind of shy about that. But if I'm sitting at my seat and I'm doing it, then I talk a lot more. My voice is very expressive. I like being in my seat more than talking in front of someone.
So it makes you feel more comfortable, more confident if you're kind of sitting down, not up in front of people.
Yes.
Do you feel like when a professor pushes you to get up in front of people and present the information like that, do you think it develops your public speaking skills?
In a way, yes. But then at the same time, I don't know. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be in front of people. I don't want to be talking. But at the same time, it's pushing me out of my comfort zone. It's making me more aware of it and being more doing it. I'm hands-on doing it, so...
So do you feel like it gets easier over time? Like maybe your freshman year, you were more nervous to stand up in front of people, but as more professors have pushed you to do that, it's gotten easier over time?
Yes.
Well, good. What is one thing that sticks in your mind about your favorite professor you've had in your time at Mac?
One thing that sticks in my mind is compassion. She loved what she did. She told us multiple things that she's done in her career-wise, the good and the bad, the positive, the negative. I mean, it's not all just about the bright and shiny. I mean, there's going to be rough days. There's going to be times where you contemplate whether you made the right decision or not. And having a professor actually talk to you about times where she didn't know what she was doing, whether she made the right call, stuff like that, I think that really shows the type of professor and even the type of human that person is. They're admitting faults. Just they're being completely and 100% honest and truthful with you.
And speaking from experience. And
yeah.
So you think maybe it's important for a professor to have that background of actual fundamental knowledge that they've gone out there and experienced these things as opposed to just standing up and teaching about them in theory.
I absolutely 100% believe that. When someone can talk to you about places they've been or in situations that they've been in and actually told you the truth about, I don't know if I really made the right call. I had to talk to my supervisor and know whether I did what I was supposed to, or even talk about just different life events, or even once they can come back on their lives and talk about something that was pertaining to the lecture, I think that's really awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about what makes a good professor, but what is something that maybe angers you about a professor that makes you feel like maybe they aren't as good, or what really gets at you about a professor?
What gets at me is when they do not get back to you in a timely manner. They don't grade in a timely manner. You don't get your tests back in a timely manner. Like, if we take a test, perhaps, and I don't get it back for 2 weeks, and I have a paper or I have a homework assignment, and I don't know whether I'm going to get it right or not because I didn't get my test back. So I don't know for sure whether I had the right answer or not on the test. I mean, how am I supposed to learn if I'm not getting my homework back in a timely manner to know whether I'm doing right or if I'm doing wrong?
So you think evaluation and timely response and communication are really important?
Yes, and especially when a professor either doesn't look at your email or sees it and doesn't respond. That really irks me too, because I took the time out of my day to message you because I had an honest question or I really needed an answer and I don't get it, or I get a response in 5 days. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Brittany, thank you for your time, and I hope that you will participate in future podcasts.
Thank you, Jordan.
Okay. What year in school are you, Katie?
I'm in my 4th year.
What is your major?
My major is sign language interpreting.
Exciting. What kind of classes do you prefer? Like a lecture or like a lab, or do you prefer more hands-on?
I prefer a class that's more hands-on, like any of the ASL classes where it's basically hands up the whole time.
Interpreting and doing like sign language and stuff like that, right?
Yep, those are the best.
What is the most standout quality to you in a professor?
Having the ability to be personable and just being able to get help from them really shows that a professor cares about their students and what's going on the campus.
Gotcha. Do you feel like if a professor pushes the students out of their comfort zone that it helps them develop, or if maybe they let them develop more at their own pace?
I feel like getting pushed out of our comfort zone is good. It motivates us to think a little bit differently, and I realize that depending on the individual, it may change. But for me personally, I like to be pushed out of my comfort zone.
So do you think a professor just needs to know each individual student and how they learn best?
I think that that's difficult just because knowing every single student in their classes and teaching per their needs may be difficult, but maybe understanding that implementing both ways into the course altogether will help the students be able to develop on their own and also push them a little bit.
So a little something for everybody.
Yes, exactly.
Do you feel comfortable when a professor asks you to like actively participate in a class, like maybe stand up in front of class and talk or different things like that?
Oh yeah, I'm always open to do stuff inside of the classroom.
Do you feel like it develops your skills professionally or as a student when they do push you to do things like that?
I think it does because it's pushing me to talk in front of my peers or do something that shows that I'm competent, and so therefore I'm going to have to act professional and have my knowledge along with being able to get the message across the way that they need to.
Gotcha. And what is one thing that sticks out in your mind about your favorite professor you've had?
I would say always telling you, to stay motivated and keep going and just telling you that you are good enough to get what you want.
So being more of like a motivator as well as educator?
Yes, I think that's perfect.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we are here with Dr. Wiediger, who is a psychology professor at MacMurray.
I hope so.
Welcome. Okay. So we've kind of talked to students about what makes a good professor, and I wanted to get your input from the other side of it, kind of what you think. So you teach like lectures?
Of course.
You stand up in front of the class. It's not
Yes.
like a lab situation.
Well, I've taught some research methods type of labs, but no, for the most part, we do lecture. Yeah.
Do you feel like that is the way that students learn the best?
I think that's an interesting question. I didn't know you were going to ask that. That's an interesting question. Is it the way they learn the best? I don't know. It's sort of a really classical way of thinking about learning, where students are sort of these passive participants in classrooms. I think that's the way a lot of people feel about it. A lot of students feel about it is like, I just sit there and somebody talks at me. And I think what good professors, good teachers, good educators try to do is they try to remove or decrease the passive nature of that interaction. Really what you want is the students interacting with the information as it's being presented and applying it to sort of integrate it into the way they think about the world. And so what a good teacher, as far as this question goes, a good teacher will not make it a passive experience. And so insofar as that's the best way for most students, probably not. But is it a bad way? Probably not, as long as the professor is mindful of the fact that students aren't going to learn if they're passive participants in the classroom. They have to be active, they have to be engaged, they have to be thinking, they have to be integrating, they have to be applying while they're hearing this information. They have to be thinking about it.
Retaining it as opposed to just regurgitating it for the purposes of
Right.
the test or something.
The worst thing a student-teacher interaction in a classroom could be is I put a PowerPoint slide up, students write it down, and then they go to their phones and stop thinking about the information. That the limit of their thinking about the information is I've written it down, therefore I've learned it. Right? They need to be engaging with the information and listening to the professor describe it and trying to think about what does this mean to me? How can I apply this to the people that I interact with? I had a student I was just talking to earlier who's taking this information from a learning class that we're in. We're talking about classical conditioning and how classical conditioning can help explain addiction and recuperation from addiction. And so what she's doing is she's applying this information as I speak about it to her patients and think, how does this apply to this particular person? And she's bringing it in and integrating it into her knowledge structures and creating examples for herself, right? Most students don't do that.
Right.
And so when a student would say, well, I don't learn from this style of teaching,
Yeah.
Because it's not, well, it's because you're not trying to learn enough.
That's what the students that we interviewed kind of said, that they're more hands-on learners, so they learn better when they're...
Well, of course they're hands-on learners. Is because somebody is... Here's the thing. When somebody says they're a hands-on learner, what they're saying here is they want to be spoon-fed things to do so that they can think from those things. Good students will do this on their own. They'll create ways for themselves to interact with the information in their mind, in their imagination when they're writing the notes, and they'll ask questions related to those applications. It's like, how does this explain the person I'm working with? How does this explain my dog learning how to do a trick? How does this explain how I think about this information? And so they'll ask those questions of those applications instead of being a passive audience member. But it's not just on the student. Good teachers will provoke students to interact with the information. They'll ask good questions, so they'll create great examples so the students are sort of forced to ponder these things in the classroom. So
That's interesting that you brought that up, because in the interviews we never talked about what makes necessarily a good student. It's all with the professor, how the professor presents the information and how you learn in the classroom setting as opposed to what you do with it once you're given it.
See, I'm not a big fan of the idea of different styles of learning per se. I do agree that some examples or some types of examples might resonate more with people because of the way they've interacted with information in the past. But I don't think people are incapable of learning or less capable of learning in different settings. So when I hear students say, well, I need more hands-on, or I tend to think less well of that. I tend to think, well, why don't you try to apply this to something on your own, and then report back to me what you're not learning from this, or what gaps you have in understanding how that application works. And that's where good assignments fit in. Good papers. You write a paper on go out and interact with 2 salespeople and try to identify the techniques that they used. And if they can't do that, either I haven't taught the techniques well enough, that setting maybe wasn't the best for techniques, and in that case the student could try to suggest techniques for that person to have used against them, or there's sort of some fundamental gap between where that student at with the information, right? Maybe I taught it well enough, but the student's just not applying it. And so these are all things that through that application of the student in that assignment, right, they're getting that hands-on work. But do you think a student would be okay with getting assigned a 5-page paper
different sales styles?
Right. You know what I'm saying? They want to do hands-on work, but they don't want to do the assignments. Right. Which assignments are sort of the way for a traditional lecture to get the out-of-classroom work done, the hands-on work done, that they tend to think of as...
They would rather be doing that in class time.
Right, of course, because why learn things in class when you could be doing this sort of fun stuff instead, when it's all towards the same goal? And the question that you ask sort of belies this idea of a flipped classroom, the idea where maybe they learn the information outside the class, and then in class they get their hands dirty. And I tried that once, and it was a miserable failure because students wouldn't do the work outside the classroom. They kept coming in, and I was asking them, okay, you're supposed to read this chapter. Here's the activity in the classroom, which is the application of that material. Get to it, and I'll help you out. And it ended up being me having to teach them the material as well as doing the in-class thing, and it ended up snowballing into a big, massive problem. And so I've not tried to scale to that size. I've just found it a lot more useful to the student, lead to a lot more student success in my classes, that I give the assignment that requires them to create the hands-on experiment on their own outside of the class.
Gotcha. Another question we had is, do you feel like professors pushing students out of their comfort zone as opposed to moving at maybe a more comfortable pace? Do you think that's more beneficial to a student, to push them to things that make them...
When I hear this, I think of the student who's sitting there writing and their hands falling off, and they're complaining about their hand falling off. I think that's sort of what you're getting at, right? The sort of, you're pushing forward, you're getting through content.
Well, we kind of talked about getting up in front of a class and giving presentations of things that make people uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
Things that push you to learn the information because you have to give it to somebody, but it makes you uncomfortable to get up there and do it because it's not something you're really used to.
I believe in making students uncomfortable. I think that's actually a role of higher education.
Yeah.
I think that students should be challenged, intellectually especially. One of the real big buzzwords right now is this idea of safe zones. Have you heard of safe zones? And it's something that I'm sympathetic to, the idea that some students especially, need a place in their lives where they can just say, I can take a breath, I can feel comfortable, I can feel accepted. But the classroom is not that place, right? The classroom is not the place where you should feel comfortable. It should be the place where when somebody tells you something, it provokes you to thought and it provokes you to action. And if it's not doing that, then I don't think it's doing its job. So when you say making people uncomfortable, I think that's sort of like the idea, right?
Yeah.
Is it really comfortable to know you're ignorant? I hope not. I hope it makes you uncomfortable when you think about the world in a new way that you hadn't, and to think about your previous state of ignorance. I think students should feel uncomfortable. With the election of President Trump, a lot of my examples have been based upon what Hillary did in the campaign and what Trump did in the campaign for my social psychology class, because it's such an applied idea of in-group, out-group distinctions about how we think of ourselves, how we think about other people. It's just such a right. It's such a rich set of examples. But thinking about those things, whether you were on the Trump side, the Hillary side, or I don't care side, it should make you uncomfortable that you can so easily explain these types of behaviors through science, right? And how even if you're a Trump supporter and you look at some of the language there, white supremacists love Trump. Why is that the case? Right. Should it make you comfortable that your self-identification group is pretty similar to David Duke? And on the other side of it, should you feel comfortable that the Communist Party, right, identified in the same way you did with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders? Should that make you comfortable? This is something that 15 years ago would have made uncomfortable. And so I had a student leave from my class last week because I made an example of something that Trump said, followed by an example of what Hillary Clinton said in advertisements. We're talking about persuasion, and presidential campaign ads are great.
There's something.
Right, and so, but the student felt uncomfortable. They left. They were provoked. That's great. I wish they wouldn't have been provoked to the point to leave the class. I wish they would have been provoked to the point where they would have stood up and said, I think this is BS. I feel uncomfortable with this, and this is why. Because then we could have a discussion about that discomfort and how that relates to the material, right? Because this person was uncomfortable watching a clip of David Duke, the former leader of the KKK, strongly endorsing Trump. Because he felt like that was saying that all Trump supporters were racists.
Well, it's good that it provoked the thought to that point that it made them, that they have strong enough feelings about it to do something.
Right. I just wish they would have asked a question, made a statement, or tried to figure out, and when you talk about, Hillary Clinton and the Communist Party endorsing her, of course, that should make people, moderates, uncomfortable.
Right.
So.
Interesting. Do you feel like active participation, obviously you do, develops your skills?
Of course.
As opposed to just passively sitting there?
Of course. It's critical thinking, right? It's analysis. It's discourse. It's the ability to convey an idea through the spoken word.
Do you feel like you can tell as a professor when the students are actively engaged with what you're trying to teach? Sometimes.
The modern student, and I've not been in this profession so long that, I wasn't one of these types of people. I think the generation of student that I was in graduate school was the first generation that had laptops in the classroom. And, they're distractions.
Yeah.
And so you get less of that pure engagement. The cell phones are the replacement for the laptop, right? You used to have these big bricks you'd bring in and you had to plug in. They'd run out in five minutes of power. Yeah. But I think it's harder now. And I think you can get the ones who have a sincere interest in engaging because they sit in the front and they ask questions. And those that are less interested in engaging sit in the back and tend to be on their phones. But that's the choice they're making. They're also going to do less well on the exam. They're going to acquire less material. I would rather have them in the classroom than not. I would rather have them, choosing to be with us and absorbing some of that information or discourse that other people are presenting than not. And I'd rather have them looking at a phone on their desk than a phone in their crotch. Right. And so, but that policy that I have, I think one of the end results is that I do get a little less engagement than, or a little less would be an understatement, than people who don't allow those devices in their room or don't require full attention.
Do you feel like more students show up maybe to your classes than others?
Yeah, I firmly do. My attendance rates most of the time are pretty high, with the exception of a couple classes here and there. I have my learning class right now. We're in the slog, the middle of the semester, right? We have an exam coming up at the end of this week. I think students are, this new material, they checked out a little bit this week. But there are things you can do to, re-excite them to come to class. Just was it Monday? I brought my dog to class.
Oh, I saw on Snapchat.
Yeah. See, I didn't know people were Snapchatting that.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I brought my dog to class, and the idea was we're talking about reinforcement, operant conditioning, and so we were going to shape my dog, my new beagle puppy, to stay, and to learn learn the word stay, reinforce with a little doggy biscuit, and then shape stay from a 2-second like sitting in place to a 15-second behavior sitting in place while I'm walking away from the animal. So, that was something that probably 100% attendance this week because of that. Because
right, it's exciting.
Right, but that's the type of thing you do. You're as a teacher, you're a bit of an entertainer.
Right.
You're I think good teachers see themselves as entertainers, unfortunately.
Especially in college when you have kind of a choice whether to show up or not, as opposed to
well, yeah, students are paying for this, so they can choose not to show up and they can choose to get poor grades, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a choice they are making, because they have so much going on. Yeah. They work, right? A lot of them have kids. Yeah. The pulls of social media and streaming services and friends, some of these, they have more reasons not to be in class and to be social with other people or to watch movies. So.
All right. So what is one thing that sticks in your mind about your favorite professor when you were in school?
Oh, geez. So I've had a couple favorite professors. And one was a professor at community college who talked about his experiences as an anthropologist with different tribes of people. And I think the reason why I found him so compelling was because of how he interwove his experiences, like in the real world, with these concepts of anthropology and culture and different perspectives. It was one of the, I think, more enlightening classes I ever took, where I wanted to memorize, I wanted to learn, I wanted to integrate everything. I didn't think of education in those terms back then. I just I want to get A's.
Right.
That's why I thought of it back then. But when I reflect on it now, Dr. Van Alstyne was really sort of provoking his students to learn and to actively learn and to integrate and think about the way they view their own world, while he's telling these stories about fragrant cow dung.
Oh my gosh.
He was for his master's degree, he went to Malawi, a small African country, and talked about how he lived with this group for 2 years. And so he learned how to make these thatch roofs where you would take cow dung and you would intermix it with the grass and the branches, and you would create this sort of putty.
Right.
And he talked about how at first he thought the cow dung was really awful, but now it's just like, and if you think about cow dung as people can think that cow dung is sort of sweet and fragrant, that's really, and so, but you think about the way we view the world, and there are things that we do that other people think are weird, like kissing, like African tribes think that kissing is like swapping spit and dirt and filth.
Yeah.
So that class, and then in graduate school, Craig Parks, he's a statistician, social psychologist, and he really promotes my philosophy. He really set the standard for my philosophy. And I had a class with him where I didn't do very well. But I really appreciated his self-presentation. He wore shorts and tie-dyed shirts every day. He wore sandals every day. Shaving habits are irregular.
Right.
But it gave him an air of sort of interaction, like you felt he was open and accessible, and that he didn't put himself above his students, that he saw them as, if not equals, then colleagues, where he might be the lead. And that's how he led his classes, where when you're interacting in his classes, it's like, hey, let's have a discussion about this. Let's look at this thing, and I'm going to talk about it, but feel free to interrupt me at any time, because that suggests that there's a gap between where you are and where I'm at, and we got to get everybody in the same boat so we can keep moving on. Yeah, and it was such a great experience, and it was a great time to have it because I had him for 3 classes just before I started teaching my first psychology class, and learning about being weird and different and unique in the classroom and how that helped engage. So seeing him do that with what else I was going through, it really sort of solidified the type of professor I wanted to be.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Do you feel like students can relate to that in you?
I hope so. If not, then my entire philosophy of teaching is broken. You know, we have people on our campus, there are people everywhere who believe that they're the enlightened person who goes into the classroom, and students are better seen but not heard unless they ask for them to be heard in these really specific and predefined spaces. Like at the end of a lecture with 5 minutes to go, does everybody understand this?
Any questions?
Are there any questions, right? As opposed to provoking those questions throughout and being responsive to where the students at and where they want them to be on the fly. So, yeah, you have those type of people who believe that they're the enlightened guide. And it's a very classic view of education where I am smarter than you are, I am more educated than you are, so listen to me, I'm going to pour my wisdom onto you, and you're going to be like a cup, like catching all this rainwater of wisdom. And I don't think, I think that exists everywhere. And so.
All right. Well, that's all I have for you, so I appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
very much.
Now, after hearing from both sides, the professor and the student, I think that it's really interesting to kind of see which sides put more emphasis on what, that the students are more interested in, like the learning environment and learning styles, hands-on as opposed to lecture, where Dr. Wiediger talked more about the students' own ambition and pushing themselves to learn the information and retain them, as opposed to just having it blatantly put out there, this is what you need to know. Creating your own opportunities to interact with the information. I think that's really interesting because I'm not sure that students really think of that a lot of the time. It's just doing what the professor expects laid out in the syllabus that is going to help you pass the class, basically. I think that it might be easy to forget that this information is something that, we're going to rely upon in our careers, depending on, your various career choices. Interacting with that information in any way that you can, any way that you can create the opportunity is going to be beneficial. I also think that Dr. Wiediger's teaching style is very interesting, kind of different, good. Students really enjoy it, respond to it very well. I've taken some of his classes and I really enjoyed them. He does make you feel like an equal in the fact that he really sincerely wants you to learn the information, and I think that that's one of the things that really draws me to a professor, is that their passion coming through them personally. We see a lot of that in the social work department. Our professors are really, really passionate, and it really makes us aspire to be the best we can be. We know that they're giving us their best, and we want to give that back to them. And I think that the relationship between a student and a teacher is really important. Mutual respect, mutual understanding, being able to come to a common ground, understanding what the other is expecting, I think is really important, not having a gray area. But it was interesting to see that the students were less so focused on flipping it on themselves. Dr. Wiediger kind of took our question, what makes a good professor, and flipped it to what makes a good student, which is equally as important in a classroom, if not more so. We are going to school for our own benefit and to create a future for ourselves. So it's important that we do everything we can as students to make the professors great, to help us make us great. It's like kind of a reciprocal cycle that we have going. But I really am interested in everybody else's opinions. Feel free to leave comments on the podcast, things that you might want to hear in the future, or comments you have about this podcast. I want to thank Brittany and Katie and Dr. Wiediger for their time, taking their time out to help us out. We really appreciate it. And this is Jordan Gill for the MacMurray College Social Work podcast, and I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening.